Hi, in this week's video I'm going to demonstrate some concepts that should help you work through the book examples as well as with your assignment. I have some of the challenges here from page 53 in the text. If we go ahead and look at challenge number 1, it asks us to enter two numbers. I'll enter 5. Then it asks me to enter another number. I'll enter 6. When I do that, it states here that the sum of the two numbers is 11. So if we want to take a look at how we actually did that, we'll hit Alt F11 to go to our Visual Basic Editor, and we see here some code that's in sheet 1 of this particular project. It's the command button 1 click event. Whenever that button is clicked, I declare two variables. They're of the type integer, which means they're going to store a number. I call them int1 and int2. int1, I assign the value of whatever the user enters in the first input box. int2, I assign the value of whatever the user enters in the second input box. Sheet 1, range A1 is where I have the sum of the two numbers entered is, and then sheet 1, range B1, which is cell B1, I set that value equal to the sum of those two integers. So that's how this program works. Now to jump ahead a little bit, I can show you a little bit about debugging, which will allow you to step through this one line at a time and see how it actually works. This will be discussed in more detail later in the course, but it's also helpful to know right now in case you need to debug your program as you're working on it. So I can go ahead and click over in this column and put a breakpoint on this subroutine, which means next time I try to execute this, rather than just running, it's going to actually stop here and let me step through it one line at a time. So if I return and click the button again, this time, rather than just running, it takes me directly to the Visual Basic Editor and highlights the line I'm on. Now if I hold my mouse over the debug here, you can see some shortcut keys. You can use F8 to step through things one line at a time. Because of the program I'm using to record this, I can't use F8 right now because that will stop my recording, so I'm going to actually go up here and click on Step Into. When I do that, it goes to the next executable line of code, which is where I'm assigning int1, the value of whatever is entered in the input box. Right now int1 is empty because the input box hasn't been shown yet, but when I execute this line, the input box does appear, and this time I'll enter 11. Then returns me to the code window. If I hold my mouse over int1, I can now see that int1 is equal to 11. int2 is still 0. The input box hasn't popped up yet, but I'll hit debug, step in again. This time I'll enter 12. So now int1 is equal to 11. int2 is equal to 12. I'm now going to go ahead and set the value of this range, which happens to be cell A1. It already says the sum of these two numbers entered is, but I'm just going to overwrite that with the same value again. And now I'm going to go ahead and set B1 equal to the sum of those two numbers. Now right now B1's 11, which was the result of the last addition that was done. This time I'm going to be adding 11 and 12, so I should get 23 after this executes. And that's what I get. So this is the end of the sub. As soon as I hit F8 or step into one more time, we're going to return to the Excel spreadsheet. I'll go ahead and take this breakpoint off now. We don't need that anymore. And when we return, we can see the sum of the two numbers entered is 23. Okay, we have a couple other challenges that I've done here. Challenge 2. Your incrementing variable is now 5. Each time I hit this, it's going to increment by 5. I want to take a look at how that works. Alt F11 to go back to the editor. This one's pretty simple. Every time command button 2 is clicked, we have a variable called int increment by 5. We simply take whatever the value of that variable is and add 5 to it. And then we use the same code as last time to go ahead and display those results in cells A1 and B1. For the third challenge, it simply pops up a message box with the current time. I want to take a look how that works. Just a one-liner. one line of code, and if you weren't sure about how to do this part, you could always just look in the help. And finally, challenge 4, where it asks for a name, a phone number, and then displays your name and phone number are as follows. Take a look at how this one works. What I did here, I entered a correct phone number. However, if I would have entered it incorrectly, we would have got a message box that says to use the correct format. So let's go ahead and try that. Oh, I did not enter a correct phone number format, so I got the message box prompting me to use the correct format. This next example is called Fun with Strings. This one will show you some of the different ways you can concatenate and manipulate string values. A string variable is called that because it's a string of text, as opposed to an integer, which is a number, and the other data types discussed in the book. So if I click on Begin, it asks me for my first and last name. And after I enter that, it displays a number of different concatenations or different versions of that. If you want to take a look at how that works, Alt F11. This time I'm in a different sheet, so rather than looking at this code from the page 53 challenges, I'm going to find the sheet I'm in now, which is called Fun with Strings. I'm going to go to sheet 1, and here's the code relating to that. You can see all we're really doing here is using an input box to capture the user's name. We're finding out where the space is so that we can split the first and last name. And we're then outputting these different versions of that to the worksheet. So another example called parameters.xlsm. And what this one really shows you is how you can capture different parameters that are passed into some of the default events that happen. In this case, we're using a command button, and depending on which mouse button we use, whether or not the shift key is held, and where on this button we click, we're going to see different values at the top. So if I just click normally using the left button, we see button 1, shift is not held, and depending on where I click, I get different values for X and Y. So if I click near the top left, I get low values for X and Y. Bottom right, I get high values for X and Y. Here, Y is low, but X is high. Here, Y is high, but X is low. If I hold in Shift while I click, you can see that it now understands that the Shift key is held in. And likewise, if I use my second mouse button instead of the first, button 2 is indicated. Button 4 happens to be my mouse wheel that I'm clicking. And then your mouse may have various other buttons that this would detect. So finally, I have an example here of what your homework might look like when it's done. This is the face that I drew and imported into an ActiveX image control. Now right now I'm in design mode, so clicking on this doesn't do anything. But if I exit design mode and click in various places, you can see here I'm showing the X and Y coordinates just as we did in the previous example. However, in my program, and in your program, this is what you'll be doing, I've used these X and Y coordinates to figure out where each eye starts and ends, approximately, where the nose starts and ends, and where the mouth starts and ends. And I use this to display this cell, which tells me which part of the face I'm clicking on. So I've used an if statement to say if X and Y are within a certain range, I'm clicking on the right eye, the left eye, the nose, the mouth, or just some random area of the face. Then for challenge 2, I've shown a few different ways to do it here. If we take the number 4, one way you could get the square root I'm sorry, actually this says square root of 16, so I'm going to go ahead and put 16 in here. So the square root of 16 is 4. One way you could determine that is by taking 16 to the power of 1/2. This is not what you would do for your homework because we want to use one of these VBA methods. Another way you might do it is by using the SQRT function that's built into Excel. Those are the ways you may have done it prior to having VBA, or if you weren't trying to complete a VBA assignment. Because we're trying to complete a programming assignment here, you kind of have to take the long way around. So I have two different functions that I've created in a module. One's called my square root. That's taking the square root of whatever's in that cell. The other one is my square root 2, where I used a different method. And you can get some hints on that in the hint section that I posted this week. But these are 4 different methods of doing the same thing. In real life, you would only ever use one of these 2, most likely this one. However, there are at least 2 more ways you can do it using VBA, which I've shown here. So we can enter any number we want and get the square root here. Down at the bottom, I have challenge 4, which I didn't ask you to do, but this is another one of the challenges. So you see here I have 2 check boxes, and when I check one, it says 1 is checked. When I uncheck it, none are checked. When I check both, both are checked. And when I check just 2, 2 is checked. So if you want an extra, something extra to really challenge your skills, you can try challenge 4, but the face assignment is pretty challenging in itself, so I'm sure by the time you get done with that and challenge 2, you may have had enough for the week.